Good morning, everyone. I'm in a rainy Rotterdam, and you're in rainy all over the place, really, but rain seems to be consistent. Thank you all for coming. This is another one of our pop-up webinar conversations that we love doing. We've done them on all sorts of different topics. The last one we did was on Black Lives Matter with Jim Roberson. Today, a different topic again, but a hugely important topic, and it's a topic that's sort of close to independent thinking's heart since we well, in lots of reasons, but also that sort of culminated in our book, The Working Class, where we looked at the narratives that were going down around people from poorer backgrounds, poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, or the working class, whatever that might mean. And we're just trying to change the narrative and move it away from this concept of the feckless poor, it's their own fault, they should pull themselves up by the bootstraps, all that sort of narrative that's around, and they're still around. We'll come back to that in a little while. Oh, sunny in Fife, I'm told. So there we go, Scotland, get it good for once. And one of the things that we've done with independent thinking, we've looked over the last few weeks to sort of bolster our list of associates, looking at some people who are just doing amazing things around teaching and learning, especially with children from poorer backgrounds, from working class backgrounds, which is why Haili Hughes came to our attention, and we're delighted that we've accepted her and she's accepted us. So she's now an associate brought in through lockdown, but at some point we'll meet properly. But her work is sort of come to our attention, working in a northern secondary school. She's an English teacher, amongst other things, but driven to get the best out of children from the poorer backgrounds, drawing on from her own experience of growing up in a council estate and periods of homelessness, and also now being a serial overachiever with 4 books on the go and a PhD and quite a career behind her. So we'll hear from Haili in just a minute. And then in the What Now Week webinars we did a few weeks ago, one of the conversations around this issue of the working class and social mobility was with Real, David Cameron, and Chris, second name gone for now, but it'll come back to me, around Chris's experience growing up in Edinburgh and with a mother who was a drug addict and having to look after his brothers and sisters. And as a result of that conversation, a few people contacted me directly afterwards and said, you need to speak to Liza Ward. You need to check out her radio program, Ladder to Nowhere, and Nina's going to put that in the chat. And you need to have a conversation because I think you two will get on really, really well. So Liza and I had a few conversations, and that's led to this, where we're just going to have an hour, the three of us, well, Haili and Liza really, just talking about education, a life growing up in a working class background, life of poverty, if that's the right word for it, poorer socioeconomic background, the challenges, gangs, crime, teenage pregnancy, it's all here. And I want to unpick it in such a way that there is information that teachers who are observing can take things away in terms of their work supporting children and young people from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds. So let's go to Haili first. So Liza, if you just close your microphone down and Haili opens hers up. And Haili, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now, and where are you now? What are you doing?
Hello everybody. I grew up in a town in the northwest, and my mum was a teenage mother. She unfortunately was sexually assaulted, which is how I actually came about to be at a party. And she had me at age 16, remarkable woman when I think about it. So by the age of 19, she actually had 3 children. And she'd met the man that I grew up thinking was my father, and to all intents and purposes absolutely is. And married him, but then that relationship ended, and she found herself, on her own, sort of very early 20s with 3 young children. And there just wasn't the support in the early 1980s that there is now for mothers. She was unable to work. She very much relied on the benefit system. She absolutely tried her best in every way she could. And that was how I grew up. We didn't really have any books in the house. I often used to fantasize that perhaps I was the child of a scientist and a writer or something, and had been a foundling that was found on steps, because I loved to read, and there was nobody really else in my family who I had as a role model and could relate to really in that. And I grew up on a council estate, and I actually ended up with 6 of us. So I'm the eldest of 8 now, but there were 6 of us growing up. You know, we all had to share rooms early on, so it wasn't conducive to any kind of schoolwork or studying. I didn't really have any role models that had been to university or college, or even had any aspirations to have a career, really, to be honest. But I always had this love of writing, love of reading, and really a longing to get out of the situation that I was in. I wanted more. Somehow, I can't really explain it, but it was very much an intrinsic motivation. So I worked really hard, and at 16 I did okay on my GCSEs, not brilliantly. I managed to go to sixth form college, where I found myself in a position where I became homeless. In the second year of sixth form college, my relationship had broken down with my parents, and I had nowhere to go. So I was going out with a boy at the time, and his parents put me up, as did some grandparents, but I was very much sofa surfing, and I had to work sort of 60 hours a week during my A-levels to make ends meet. So I didn't do very well on my A-levels, unsurprisingly, because I was shattered and very stressed, and then managed to get a place at university, and kind of just went from there, to be honest. Had this longing to become a journalist. Somehow managed it. Had to work all the way through university, had to fight very hard. Somehow managed to get a job at a national newspaper in London. I think the planets were aligned for me somehow. And the rest is history, really. Did that for quite a number of years, and then I've just said in the foreword to my book that just came out yesterday that I found a conscience and decided to leave journalism and become a teacher, and that really is what happened, to be honest. And I've been teaching now for 13 years, so that's where I am. I'm doing a PhD at the moment as well, and I just think there's a delicious irony in the person who had kind of no cultural capital, now reading Bordeaux and writing essays on it, really. I suppose I've come quite a long way, but it's not been easy, that's for sure.
No, I'm sure you achieved so much, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Yesterday, I've lost track. I know there are 4 books that you're working on. What today's book?
So yesterday's book was a book with John Catt, and it's about teacher retention. It's actually aimed at experienced teachers, because I saw a gap in the market there and thought that there's a lot of support, there's a lot of CPD and development for early career teachers, but for people like me who are actually really happy to just stay in the classroom, I say just in inverted commas, there isn't really the support there, and nobody's really looking at the teacher retention statistics for people who are 5 years and over. It all tends to be early career teachers. So yeah, that was out yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I was just looking, is Liza still there? She
is, yeah. She disappeared for a minute, but she's back, yeah.
She's back. So Liza, can we go over to you? Thank you, Haili. I'll come back to you. There's quite a lot I want to unpick in the things that you said, especially around cultural capital, which is a thing at the moment, certainly in England, that the inspectors are looking for, but there seems to be some confusion as to what it is, or it can be manipulated into what it can be. Cultural capital is our culture, not your culture, and we need to unpick that. Liza, if you make yourself visible and speak and everything.
Yes, can you hear me? I'm unmuted. Can you see me? Hi. Yeah, on the notes of cultural capital, that's exactly, for me personally, one of the biggest issues that we face. And if you really drill into it, equality has been the theme in so much of this. I don't know, I can't, at this present time, equality is a really big deal. And I think at the root of most inequality is an issue to do with where we start out in life. Whether that's a physical appearance, or, as you were saying, our cultures, or what you've got in your pocket. It seems, for me personally, ludicrous that could actually differentiate a person's goalposts as dramatically as it does. And I did hear a lot of what you said, Haili. I'm so sorry, I had Wi-Fi issues. I had to ask my daughter upstairs to come off the internet. Talk, don't go there. But basically, for me personally, you know, my work, the work I've done with the Church of England, so I've done presenting for the Church of England, finding the treasure, going into the estates and actually looking at what the church is trying to do to support people, or as the church words it, help people. And then also looking myself through my own lens at my life and how I was raised, and trying to illuminate actually some of the external factors that posed major hurdles to me. And yes, unsurprisingly, education was one of them. I think the slight difference with me is that I was actually homeschooled for a lot of it by a very capable grandmother. And she equipped me with the skills to be able to sit entrance exams for grammar school from about the age of 5. Along with a mother who made sure there was always books in the house. Don't get me wrong, you know, it was charity shops, handouts. It was anything that my mum could get her hands on, really. She was always very proud of this big roll of paper that used to appear all the time that she got from some industrial place where we could be left for hours to do artwork, you know. And there was always a channeling of the blackboard being present, the chalk and so on. But what I can genuinely say is, you know, I was a family of 3, and even then we didn't survive all of the hurdles that lifestyle throws at you, because a woman on her own is vulnerable at the very best of times. And that's regardless of class or poverty. A woman on her own is vulnerable, and that's just my take on it. However, I can imagine with the size of your family, Haili, just, sorry, harking back to that, you know, your mother must have been really bewildered to a point where that degree of organisation and that degree of structure, even if she'd wanted to put it in there, you know, we were also fortunate that we did have my very strong, very matriarchal grandma. So it was like 2 against 1, you know, kind of thing, you know. We were all to different dads, and we grew up in inner city Manchester. We grew up in a Hughes, which was the social experiment in the centre of Manchester. And I recall very clearly from very early years there being a thing with things being broken. Everything was always broken. Don't ask me how that actually was possible for such neglect on a whole group of people to take place, but from broken windows to broken animals to broken people to broken bridges to broken elevators to broken pushchairs, because trying to heave your baby up the chairs with your shopping, with your 7-year-old and with your you know, your 1.5-year-older brother isn't easy, and the frame of the pushchair wasn't strong enough for my mum, to her broken body, to her broken mind, to the broken education system that I entered, whereas I was going in with this amazing plethora of ability, which I'm very proud to say has resulted. I've got some photographs to share, hopefully, if everybody doesn't mind, but did result in me actually walking away with my GCSEs, thankfully, but not the straight A's that I was anticipated to have, because in the middle of that, I had baby. So at 13, I got pregnant, just turned 13. I think I was one of the youngest, to be honest, at the time when the big epidemic kind of like came out for teenage pregnancy. And what I recall throughout all of my education, regardless, sorry, just going back from the pregnancy, was that I was in schools where I was looking at children and thinking, something's not quite right. You know, I didn't understand why there was such restlessness, such, you know, what my grandma used to do was when the school system started to fail me, she'd pull me back out again and homeschool me again, because she would be gauging all the way through my preparation for grammar school, and she was Ofsted registered and such. You know, I'd go back into these schools and I'd think, what are these preoccupations in these children's minds that seem so unnatural? And then the teachers always, I felt, spoke to me as if there was a veneer or a glazing. So even though I was very intelligent, there was either that was an issue in the class because it meant that the teacher had to demonstrate, and you know, there would always be this feedback to my mum, well, you know, your daughter's not really mainstream, and you know, she's got more requirements than other children because I was more inquisitive and I was learning faster and I wrote faster and I was more, you know, I was bored a lot of the time, to be really honest. I was bored stiff at school, absolutely bored stiff. I read in plenitude at home. And then when I actually got to high school, that was in London as well. Oh my gosh, we lasted 6 months before we started truanting because a boy stabbed another boy with a fork, and it was over 50p. And that was it. I was like, these places are mental asylums. You know, for me, it was like, what is this? And my mum was fussy about the schools I went to, believe it or not. She actually would go through with my grandma the league tables. I know they say not to do that, and it's a bit of a cheat, and it doesn't really demonstrate anything because, you know. But let's be honest, most people who have kids that they have aspirations for do tend to refer to the Ofsted guidelines and stuff. I did it, you know. And there's stark contrasts, even between Manchester and where I am now in Hertfordshire. Manchester, a high 60% was deemed to be a win. I moved down here, and the one unexpected thing, I mean, I looked at all the primary schools because my child was young, but the one thing I didn't expect was a 20% difference increase on chances of my child getting an A to C, 5 A to C grades. At 20%, and that's between, you know, 175 miles. Why? It's also a very affluent borough. It still has the elective school system. It's, you know, they could actually say to you, your kid's not bright enough, she's not coming in, you know. And I thought, wow, it's one of the last counties to do that, and apparently it's just been ceased. I'm pretty sure it was last year. But still the schools have the remnants. You can tell the difference. You can walk into an academy and very, very quickly see the difference between maybe one of the schools like the grammars or the schools that my daughter attends. But I was raised with this mentality, and
can I ask a question?
That's my life in a nutshell. So, you know, other than to hone in on the teenage pregnancy, which I'd love for you to ask the questions, Ian, because you'll know the right angles to come from. You know.
Well, I'll come back to that because we sort of veered into grammar schools and then the gap between the north and the south, and there's all sorts of things to unpick there. With regard to you in school, when you were a child, a student, and you said there was like a veneer and you were going faster than the teachers, what was there a sense, and I'm not hopefully not putting words in your mouth, was there a sense that you were from that estate, that broken estate, therefore you shouldn't be that they had lower expectations of you because that is a thing out there? Or was it that you were just so bright that they, regardless of where you were from, you were problematic for them? And what would you have wanted them to have done? And maybe Haili can sort of come in at that point as well with regard to the students that she's worked with. You know, she's got students in her classroom maybe who are like you.
I think reading your work has been really insightful because you've captured so much of the frustration that I experienced in your opening chapters even. And one of the things is this broad brush approach to education. This idea that, you know, we can all just sit there, just absorb, just regurgitate, just that's how it's done. When I was taught by my grandma, of course, I had with my brother, and my cousin was also homeschooled by my grandma. He got second place at William Hughes, which is a leading grammar school in Manchester. And he's now an academic that's, well, he's a doctor and da-da-da-da. When I say doctor, not medical, he's a doctor of philosophy, loves Aristotle. Peter Jackson, but incredibly boring. No, I'm really joking, he's lovely. Okay, so back on track. He's basically, sorry, not him, me. What I'm trying to say is I had a grandmother where I would do an exercise or a task, and I had somebody who knew me. I had a couple of teachers. I went to 14 different schools just to make this really clear how tuned and how unsettling actually my educational experience was because of the response that my mother would get, because of the response that I would get. And I don't think I was particularly fussy either, but there was a couple of schools I'll never forget, several teachers, I could still tell you their names now, 3 in particular, who saw me. They saw me. And I've heard some of your other webinars with Jazz, for example, saying exactly the same thing. Made all the difference. And it wasn't that I wanted to demonstrate that I had an advantage academically on anybody. It was just genuinely understimulating work. I remember these flashcards where you had to go around the room and you had to find a chair and sit down with a group and answer these questions, and there was something to do with, you know, getting to the end and concluding and stuff, and they were just so, for me, they was just so basic. You know, I was doing 3 times tables in high school sometimes because some of the kids weren't capable, and it didn't mean that I thought I was better than them. It was just, I was genuinely disengaged. I couldn't engage. There was just...
So the level of the work for you was set too low academically and intellectually, and also there was a sense that only a few teachers, for whatever reason, were able to or took the time to know you and to really get to know you. Hey, I'll bring Haili in on that point, give you catch your breath, Liza. Haili, what's your view as a teacher with regard to children who are gifted but unexpectedly so, because, well, you know, kids from around here, which is something I've heard over the years so often, kids from around here or kids from that estate or kids from that road. What's it like in your school with regard to that and your approach to that, Haili?
Well, I mean, I work in a school that's got a mixture of different types of pupils. You know, we have millionaires at my school, but we also have people who are, you know, really, really scraping to survive. So it's a really interesting context to work in, actually. And prior to that, I worked in a school for 7 years that was very much, I would say, 95% kids who were in poverty. So I've been in 2 quite different settings. And what I tend to notice is I see a lot of the traits of some of the children who may be struggling with poverty that I had when I was younger, and I can only recognise that now that I'm an adult myself and I'm looking back on it. And I remember in school I was probably classed as somebody who was difficult. I was a fighter. I mean, the academic Diane Ray talks about her own background quite a lot, and how, you know, she came from poverty, very similar background to me, and how a lot of the children that she's interviewed for her books and for studies that she's done, etc., are all classed as these fighters by teachers. And like a few of you have said, you know, I had a few teachers who noticed me and got me, and with a lot of the other teachers I was just seen as a very difficult pupil to teach, very defiant. And I think a lot of that was because I'd lost my sense of identity. I felt I didn't belong. I didn't know who I was. So I wasn't somebody who, you know, was from a middle class household who went to the theatre, you know, and played a musical instrument and did all these sports, had a horse. So I wasn't somebody who felt like I could be academic. I didn't feel like it was part of who I was and who my background was. And on the estate, you know, academia doesn't give you credence, does it? You know, if you're one of the naughty kids on the estate, you know, you're a G, you're okay, you're one of us. So I was stuck between this kind of 2 dichotomies, really, that I just didn't belong to any of them. And I recognise that now a lot in some of the students that I teach. And I suppose it's about being aspirational and trying to persuade them that actually, no, you do belong. It's okay. I mean, a few years ago, I was studying the play A Taste of Honey, which is one of my particular favourites. And I had quite a difficult, challenging class, lots of boys in it who didn't really like reading, didn't like anything to do with English. But they liked me because they saw me as one of them. So it was okay. And I took them to the theatre to see A Taste of Honey, and they were so kind of uncomfortable when they arrived in their jogging bottoms, you know, and their hoods. And they loved it. Absolutely loved it. And afterwards, that, you know, I'd created the kind of inclusive environment in my classroom and outside it, really, where that they felt empowered to be able to say that they enjoyed it and didn't think it was going to be a stigma on them because they were no longer hard and they were no longer, you know, one of the boys. So I think I try in everything I do to have this kind of inclusive, positive view of aspiration, and, you know, telling them and really modelling it as somebody myself who's come from that background, that, you know, you can be all things. You don't just necessarily have to be the SWAT. They call it BASH, I think, up north now. If you're not, if you, yeah, BASH. So you bash English, you. So yeah, that's the new thing. It used to be a SWAT when I was in school, but that's probably showing my age now. But yeah, so I suppose it's about having this aspirational attitude and positivity and building this relationship with them.
You both mentioned the word belonging, and again in the book The Working Class, this sort of came through, and there's research from Cambridge where they looked at white working class underachieving boys in schools and what were the issues. And one of them was they had no sense of responsibility, no sense of agency. And another one was that they just didn't feel that they belonged to these schools. So what sorts of things do you, and then I want to come back to belonging to Liza, and also think about gangs and belonging, and especially children who have been excluded. Either they've actually been kicked out of school or just feel excluded and have walked out themselves. But how do you address belonging with the children in your school currently, Haili? What sort of things are you up to?
Well, essentially, it's about, again, building this culture of aspiration, and I think also engaging parents as well, because something that I found when I was at school is that, I might do something really exciting at school that I would then want to go home and tell my mum about. Because my mum doesn't really have any relationship with education, I'd say that she's actually suspicious of teachers, or she was certainly when I was at school. They were seen as, the establishment. They were up there with police or the social services, as somebody to avoid, really. And I found that when I became a teacher myself. I'll never forget, I rang a boy's parents from my form, and one of the parents called me a snob because I was a teacher in my old school, and I had to kind of hold the phone away and laugh to myself, because I'm probably the least snobby person in the world, but because I had now had this label as a teacher, as somebody who in their eyes, was establishment, was educated, they no longer trusted me. And I think it is about parental engagement. I think I've tried to do that a lot with a lot of the working class pupils that I teach, and actually having that relationship with the parent at home, and telling them that, we are a three-way team, and if the parents feel empowered to ask the students about what was going on at school and to getting more involved in their education, I think there is that sense of belonging. I think that they then feel that they can go home and talk about their education and be encouraged. And I don't think it's that sometimes we have this perception that working class parents don't care about education, and I don't think that's true at all. It's just them not understanding it sometimes. And my mum still doesn't. I'm in the middle of a doctorate at the moment, and when I told her that I got the place, she said, "What does that mean?" Because she just didn't understand. And she said to me, "You're quitting teaching now then and becoming a GP?" And I said, "No, I had to explain to her it's a different kind of doctor." So I don't think it's this, a lot of the time it's not this tense, fraught relationship that people think it is. I think we need to open the door more to working class parents, get them more involved in their child's schooling, and I think that very much makes them belong more.
Because one of the question came from Ros Burrows saying, that she sometimes struggles to find ways to genuinely engage parents, things like reading at home, encouraging good home learning routines. It's not that they don't want to support their children, but sometimes they don't know how. Yes. I realise lack of confidence can be the issue, and sometimes their own experience of school was negative. So it's how are you communicating with parents in a way that doesn't come across as patronising and a bit too, well, not for you necessarily, but a bit in the sort of the Ken Barlow, the white saviour coming in to sort of save the naughty kids. And then we'll come back, Liza, on gangs and belonging, but just because this is a parent one. And also just, and it relates to your experience as well, Liza, the message coming out around COVID and catch up and the children falling behind was it's the poorer children who are, running feral because their parents aren't going to be homeschooling them, whereas, and we know that's not the case. It may be the case in certain cases, but also you've got a lot of, professional middle-class parents who haven't been able to do much for their kids because they've been too busy working themselves as well. So these broad brushstrokes about parental engagement they need to be burrowed into a little bit more. So how do you engage with parents in relation to Ros's question without being patronising? And then we'll come to Liza and the belonging and the gangs.
Something I've started doing in the last few years actually is I do a weekly bulletin to my parents via email, and on it is just straightforward, this is what we've learnt in English this week, with a couple of bullet points. Well done to these people who did this fantastic piece of homework. Revision sessions are on this day on Thursday. And even in small pieces of information like that really, really engage the parents, because they can then say, oh, I know that in English this week you've been doing A Christmas Carol, or I know that in English this week you've been doing a piece of writing based on a picture. So even having that piece of information, that, you know, even that logistics of knowing what they've done in the lesson that week, I think is really, really important. So I think it's things like that. I think it's things like ringing the parents and telling them about the good things that their pupil has done, because I know for a fact that during high school, because I was a bit of a nightmare, as we've mentioned, the only information my mum ever had from school and the only interaction with teachers was to actually tell them what the pain had been that week. And whenever I have rang parents and made time to say, you know, actually this person's been fantastic this week because they've done this, they are so grateful, because they're tensed up straight away as soon as the phone goes, you know, and it's an unknown number. And as soon as you say it's school, it's kind of like, oh, what have they done now? So I think things like that, you know, focusing on the positive as well as the negative will really make parents engage with school a lot more, because as you said, Ian, many of them might have had quite negative experiences of schooling themselves, so the barriers are already up straight away. Okay, all right, thank you, Haili, that makes sense. Liza, so any things about that with parents, but also then in terms of belonging and how gangs are a form of belonging in a young person?
Well, what I'd like to say, just to also complement some of what you've been talking about with Haili, is that obviously I've been a parent for 28 years. I'm now a grandmother, and my youngest, who's doing 2-hour sessions at the moment in school, is 15, and she's a teenager at the moment. We're in what I would call a middle class environment, a middle class school, and along with the array of experience I've got of other schools, I am experiencing pretty much what Haili's just explained as being something to do with what I hear a lot of is the us and them thing, that seems to be like as if I'm some kind of person on the other end of a phone who's got a, how can I put it? But I mean, I would just see it as I have a huge frustration as a parent that I live in a very emotionally charged environment. My environment is emotionally charged because my challenges are largely subjective to the naked eye, unless they're financial. But it can be the being ostracized. Processes alienates. You know, I've been a HR professional for 12 years. Processes are something which make a person feel like they're on the other end of an examination process or no wonder people feel uncomfortable. It's not even behaviour driven. It's not even, oh, it's because my kid's bad. It's because I'm thinking, I'm human. Can you treat me as one, please? I'm not of them. I'm just mum. You know, I'm mum. I don't want to fight today with you. I don't want to feel like I'm on the receiving end of your process today. Thank you. I've got my own challenges. I've already had to juggle more than the average person, being somebody from a working class background. Whether that's segregation from cultural affairs, i.e. you can't get free theatre tickets anymore, i.e. it's really difficult sometimes just to get all your family out on a trip somewhere because one of them's got caught up in some stupidness somewhere in the town centre, or they're not responding to you the way they should be because their culture is drawing them towards gangs, because codependency runs at the root of all of this. Malformed or prematurely formed relationships. And you know, on that note, my role as the person who was given the homeschooling was picked up on very quickly, and very much in any estate that I've ever been in, people will work out very, very quickly. That lady knows how to fill out forms. That lady knows how to deal with blah-de-blahs, mathematics problems. That lady, if you're nice to her, she actually is really good at mediating disputes with the neighbour that I've just not been able to get on with. And the number of times that it was just, oh, Liza, can you come round? And just help to give words to thoughts, just help to part the anxiety long enough to just coach and guide a person through. And that's what my primary role was on estates. And it was my primary role in a gang as well. It was the fact that I was the one who was able to look at things from, and it's crazy to think this now, but genuinely seeking bureaucracy, seeking to belong, you're right, but on a bureaucratic level, seeking to understand, why is my language so inaudible to those people. Why can't they understand me? And I say, well, have you considered that when you phrase it like this, it sounds like you're being really defensive. So how about you do it like this? I actually emotionally coach grown men and grown women to try and help them feel like they can communicate all the wonderful things they've accomplished with their children, with their families. And because I've got such a trusted position in so many estates, actually, because I've also moved around a lot, I'm very nomadic, I'm afraid. That's a different story. That's probably something to do with emergency housing and God knows what else. I think I've walked into a lot of family households and I've witnessed the point where it becomes toxic. As all of these pressures pour in, all of these misrepresentations flood out all the positivity, all the love, all the connections, and what we end up with is a parent sat there looking at their children as though their children have in some way, I don't know, they failed their children, they can't bear to accept that, their children feel like they've been failed. Suddenly there's this divide and the child feels, in order to survive, I have to abandon you, actually. You're the problem. Really? Was it the parent that was the problem, or was it this avalanche of pressure? And the reason why I say this so strongly is because my daughter at the moment goes to a really 88% on the league tables, lovely school, very quaint. It's where George Michael attended, actually, round the corner, talking of millionaires. And I am treated like a them, because I don't speak that way. I don't communicate that way. I might be an award winner for an aria, which is equivalent to a film Oscar. I might have a degree that my mum still doesn't know the name of. I did sociology and criminology because I suppose I was self-healing if I look back on it. And I've got a 2-1. It should have been a first if I'd have known the process of going back and saying, listen, it's 67, can you just recalculate it all again? Which is apparently what a lot of people do. But then on top of that, I have obviously my HR experience, working as a mother, working my hands to the bones and still being caught in the rent cycle. For me to get off an estate, you know, my rent down here is £1,225 a month. There's times when I'm actually on my own. My marriage unfortunately failed because my partner had his addiction issues from his childhood that kept on cropping up, and the strain was too much for both of us to juggle that, as well as the cost of living, as well as the trauma from the past that we were still healing from. And yeah, I walk into Bushy Meads and I smile nicely and I always look presentable. And of course I have an earnest desire for my daughter to do well in life, but I don't speak like you. I speak with emotion. I speak authentically. And I am looking for you to engage with me beyond a process. And you're passing me a piece of you know, a form, a document, and you're saying, can you sign that so that we can say that, you know, like we've had this conversation and these are the actions. Oh, and you didn't mention any actions. Yeah, I did. I did mention actions, actually. I mentioned that I would like my daughter to be able to concentrate in her classes without pastoral care, over involving themselves on matters which they don't understand. If my daughter needs counselling or guidance, then it's an external thing. And this is just a little bit of what I pick up on, because they can't understand my daughter's different manner of expression. They can't understand, despite the fact that she's straight sevens, almost, pretty much, they've had to, in some way, I personally believe, genuinely, knock her confidence by focusing so critically on her order, her sense of order and organisation. And in an emotionally charged environment, it's not easy to manage that. It's not. You know, so I've deviated, but I just really want to bring that in there because I am a parent and I do struggle with it. I'll be honest with you. I don't have much respect for that school. I don't. I would like to. I used to be a parent governor there. I actually asked them to take me off the list. But anyway, by the by.
It's interesting, Liza, so one of the questions that came in on the Q&A here is, do you think Ofsted is a good way of helping parents choose the right schools, or should there be another way? And you've said at the beginning that you looked at the league tables because that's what you do, and now they're in a school your daughter's in a school with good league table positioning, but you're not happy. So clearly there are other things to be looking at. What other things?
Yeah, when I was making the evaluation for Bushy Meads, one of the things that appealed to me the most was that it was one of those schools on a large plot. Most of it's one level, and you walk between the classrooms. And because she's one of those children that has high energy and high emotional energy, because trust me, she's been through the mill. I've been through the mill. My kids have all been through the mill. And when I say through the mill, I can't even divulge. You'd have to listen to my documentary, but I can't divulge enough of what we've been through to transcend from where we were raised to where we've got to, and what that was like. I really couldn't put it in a nutshell, but I did put photos together. But basically, I thought walking outside with the air around her, in between lessons, because it's all outdoor in these separate blocks, would be wonderful, because she's got the chance to just recalibrate and to breathe and to feel the energy more in between that rotation process, and where timing's important, and suddenly all of these nuances which she's not necessarily as well equipped with because of the lack of organisation and order in our world, which we work on all the time. It doesn't mean it's dismissed. It's just we work on it. It's a skill that's not natural to us, much more that we flow in the working class. I don't know, in disadvantaged households, you don't want to plan too much because of the disappointment if the plan fails, So you inherit a manner of not planning so much. So when you look at timetables, it's actually a pressure. It's actually genuinely a pressure. When you look at mixing and changing forms, do you have to go to the same form room every morning, or could you show an interest and actually for the next day sign in for a different form, maybe because you just fancy sitting in that class for whatever reason to discuss the word of the week? It's all this giving them that power and this ability to enable choice, and I thought that walking was a good quality. I also like the fact there's a large willow tree when you walk in. That sounds very hazy, but being at one with nature and feeling grounded, surrounded by greenery, all of the things that heal, was something that I thought was essential actually for my child, along with Ofsted tables.
The green is important. There is a lot of research about access to green parks, and which is why the estate you grew up in, I'm thinking maybe didn't have access to green parks in the areas, but increasingly they're making sure that there has to be, you have to be able to get to green, and there's been research, especially around COVID, how the stress levels have been reduced if you've got access to the parks and things. So I think willow trees is as good a reason as any, I think.
It was lovely. It's actually the emblem on the blazer, and the appreciation of nature. It's big, because you're quite right. You're denied a lot of that in the States. You're lucky if you get a row of birch trees.
Yeah. That aren't broken, based on what you said earlier. There's one thing, I'm aware we haven't come back to the game, but there's one thing I wanted to focus on, just because both of you, your lives have described this, and Jazz Amplifar talks about the chaos navigators, and just how mentally challenging navigating 24 hours is in backgrounds where there is that level of chaos, that level of uncertainty. It was interesting what you said, Liza, about we don't plan because we can't face the disappointment. I think that's so poignant. And I was reading a book the other day by a Dutch historian called Rutger Bregman, and he's talking about economics and poverty, and he was talking about cognitive load. Now, a lot of teachers know about cognitive load these days, as in you don't tell them one thing and then get them to read something else all at the same time because the brain can't process it. So you do what's called dual processing. Cognitive load is when there's just too much information coming in and the brain closes down. So increasingly there are schools, mainstream schools with good exam results, some of the big academy chains who, yeah, we do cognitive load. But I'm suggesting that maybe they don't appreciate the cognitive load that the child has walked through the door with, just to get as far as walking through the door, whether they've got the right uniform, whether they're on time, whether they've eaten, all of those sorts of things. So, and I'll come to Haili on this, and I will come back to you on the gangs, Liza. But Haili, what's your perception in your school and in your background, in your experience, and what would be your advice to teachers working in the inner city schools now when we think about lives of poverty, chaos, and cognitive load, Haili?
I think it's very difficult, isn't it? Because we work in a system in England where we are governed centrally, you know, and things like the national curriculum, they are so archaic, and they are designed for middle class values, essentially, the national curriculum. And, you know, we expect all students to be able to come in with a clean slate every day and to learn things that are roughly the same things they've been learning for the last 50 or 60 years. It's almost as if time has stood still in that respect. And I think one of the things that was a big barrier to my learning when I was growing up was that, you know, I for some periods of my life was on free school meals. I was a pupil premium child, as they would call them today. But at other times, my mum didn't fill in paperwork, so I wasn't on free school meals, and that meant I had no lunch. You know, sometimes my mum would promise me that she would come in at primary school with a lunch for me at lunch, and for some reason that didn't happen. So I was very often left without lunch, and in the afternoon I was starving. And that wasn't taken account of. I was still expected to do the same work as everybody else. And you know, even things such as having holes in your shoes and having to put beer mats in them and things, it's the practicality of things like that. You know, a child can't take part in certain activities if they don't have the equipment, even the basic equipment for them. You know, we take for granted that children will be able to go home and use the internet. We've seen that during the whole COVID crisis. And some kids don't have access to Wi-Fi, they don't have laptops, they don't have mobile phones. And they, you know, although schools have tried the best in the very limited and fast-paced turnaround that they had, the disadvantage gap is widened, hasn't it, you know, throughout all this, really. So I think as schools, we need to be more emotionally aware of the barriers that there are to learning for children who grow up in poverty. I think, alas, from what I've seen in my experience in the last sort of 12, 13 years of teaching, a lot of SLT and heads who are running schools, etc., might not have had any experience of growing up in these backgrounds. So it's not the kind of, although they have, I suppose, a surface understanding of what those children's lives are like, and they're trying their best, because I think heads have been incredible, especially during this crisis. I'm not criticising them. I think sometimes it's good to actually talk to those staff in your school who've lived lives like that, and to get their opinions on it, and, you know, think about the practicalities of how they can help. I mean, I'm really lucky to work in a school that does a lot for disadvantaged children. I mean, they've fed them all through the COVID crisis, like many schools, and at the moment are providing breakfast for them in the mornings. It's just practical things like that. And I think also as well, giving them role models that haven't necessarily gone to university. You know, in the UK, we seem to peddle this ideology that university is the be all and end all. And, you know, I'm a lifelong Labour supporter, but I think in some ways, you know, in 1997, when Tony Blair did his whole education spiel, I bought into it and totally agree that if somebody aspires to university from no matter what background, you know, they should be able to go. But there are other options, and I think sometimes, especially the working class boys that I've worked with, they're frustrated because all they're peddled at school is this ideology of going to do A-levels and going to university. And for a lot of those kids, the worst thing they can possibly imagine is sitting down in a classroom for the next 5 years and writing. And I think it's about giving them, you know, access to role models who've done things that are more practical and vocational, but also access to role models who also have been to university and gone against the odds and done well as well.
You mentioned role models before. Is that you, in regard to your own childhood? Is that should schools be getting more role models in, but across a variety of different areas of society, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was at school, all I ever wanted to be was a journalist. You know, and the newspapers I was reading were full of white middle-class males. And I you know, it didn't make me think, well, I can't do it, because I'm the type of bloody-minded person that if somebody tells me I can't do something, my God, I'll be doing it. But it did make it tougher. You know, part of aspirations, isn't it, is that ability to be able to visualize yourself in the future and think, I could do this. And if you're not seeing anybody around you who's doing those jobs, it just makes it seem harder to attain and harder to get there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Liza, role models, for you, clapping that one, role models for you when you were growing up? I know your gran sort of was an important part, but were there other ones there for you?
Definitely not.
That can lead us into the gangs and things as well. I think the people around you who are influencing you.
Yeah, so as far as role models were concerned, you're quite right. Same thing, no vision, because you can't see anything to emulate towards. there's a fear of failing. I mean, you were saying about a fear of writing. It's a fear of failing. It's genuinely, you're giving me impossible hurdles here. I am unable to concentrate too long. So in a state where, unfortunately, there is a high level of conflict, where I was raised, you were drawn into that conflict because of your desire for drama. If you think about it, drama is a distraction from reality. Drama is a form of escapism. We can create it effortlessly, especially when we want to get out of telling the truth about the fact that we're actually unable to meet your expectations. You're raised in a heavy codependent environment where you was codependent on your parents potentially, and I don't mean healthy codependency, I mean where my mum was an alcoholic. I'm talking where my auntie unfortunately was in an abusive relationship. The codependency was protecting one another, shielding one another, making ends meet. You know, we certainly didn't grow up with much more than secondhand books really around us, and I can certainly relate to the hole in the shoe. Apart from mine was paper punch because it was tied by a string to a market stall. Really embarrassing. Why would you hole punch a shoe? Anyway, here I am thinking to myself, you know, codependent relationships, what's the inevitable outcome? So create drama, lots of distraction. You've got gangs, haven't you? You've got this strong-willed approach that you were mentioning, Haili. It's absolutely that's got me through life, not through being compliant, not through being overly conformist and, oh yes, miss, I've got it here on time. It's by using my imagination. It's by creating my own sense of reality that I've been able to push the boundaries that I felt were so strictly opposed to the direction I wish to go in. Me, like I say, the fear of failure. Which way am I going to go? I'm going to navigate it. I'm going to go round it. I'm going to go under it. I'm going to go any which way but the way that you're showing me, because you're showing me the fear of failure. Makes sense, right? Then you've got the competition. Again, a key part of a gang. So what people don't know about gangs from being on the inside out is that you're chosen. It's people, you know, I hear a lot of people talk about you know, oh, you're craving money or you're craving something, and it's all about the fact that you want to be cool and you want to be in this, and I'm a G. It's not. So you get a few strong performers. You get a one that's bright, maybe. You get one that's just got natural social skills. You get the one with the biggest family who's the most protected. All of those strengths immediately attract all of the ones that are less secure underneath you. So a bit like when I wanted to grow in a corporate organisation like Network Rail, I would create a team underneath me to elevate my work and my presence. It's exactly the same. And what happens is you take these lads or women, mainly lads, and the ones that I've had really good friendships with have said, you know, on one case, it's because he was a twin, so he stood out. So there was a dual thing going on. So everyone was fascinated. And though he was brilliantly raised with actually quite a religious background, most of the gangs that I know, the parents are incredibly Christian. And they've all gone to school and they're all immaculately presented. You won't ever see much dirt on a, you know, like a true gang member, you know. Obviously, we do get other gangs where it's, you know, more evident that the poverty is there, but still the embellishment and the presentation will be the biggest exertion, really. And it's because of the fact that you have to demonstrate that you've got yourself together, you know, because all of these people underneath you who are elevating you are placing you into a position of illumination. And the more that light shines on you, the more that you are seen to be the best way forward. You can lead us. You've got the sense, you've got the ability. Very quickly, I became the partner of a chap who made a significant amount of money through, really regrettably, gun dealing. So possibly, you know, when I look back on it, you know, obviously there was a lot of deceits in the early stages, and then when I realised the situation around it, again, you'd have to listen to my documentary. I started to understand how many people depended on him, and I started to understand why he had the choice of either eat or be eaten. And actually, one of the most common terms that I've ever heard, I don't know if you guys ever use this, regardless of your background, but if you haven't got respect, respect? Nobody. And there's 5 ways you can get respect if you think about it. And that's, you know, love, ideally, that would be lovely, but you could be seen as a bit of a weak link. And then you've got money, and you've got fear, and you've got knowledge. And then there's a fourth one, it'll come to me, but they just want respect. And it's the same when you're a parent in a school environment, or you're a child in a school environment, you're just looking for respect. You know, even talking about a person as though, you know, like you say, the poverty and the losses are in some way a reflection of who they are and their pride as in their character. It's humiliating. You know, it's really humiliating. And I love Jazz's take on School Blazer, and also yours with the, you know, the beer mats and the shoe. It's humiliating. You know, I'm trying to keep up the appearance that you want me to have. And yet, again, I'm failing miserably. And why are you doing that to me? I genuinely think if it hadn't have been for the knowledge and the education my grandma gave me, that made me so, I knew I could walk into any class, and if I really wanted to, I could walk out genuinely with a gold star. And that confidence that I had in my mind, which I also think helped me with what could have been severe mental health issues in my later life, which I've seen a lot of my working class friends really struggle with. And I've had to try and, again, part the waves for the anxiety to try and get some kind of grounding to help them through difficult times. I've kind of looked at that part of, you know, that foundation that my grandma gave me, and I took it for granted. And I thought to myself, you know, even if I have got, you know, a loss of this or a loss of that, and you know, I've still got pretty hair and I've got my brain, you know, and that's what's going to get me through life. And I don't know where I'd have been without it, to be honest. I think I would have been caught up with the others that are pushing up. And when I say ladder to nowhere, it's exactly that concept of there's this very narrow opening that you might have a chance of getting through if you stand out. And when you think about standing out, even, you know, seeking attention is quite common with these children from difficult backgrounds or disadvantaged backgrounds. Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. No, we've got about 3 minutes or 2 minutes left.
Oh.
Quite a few questions have come in, and I'd love to answer all these or ask all these questions, but there isn't time. So what I suggest to people, if you've got a question, and if Haili and Liza, you're okay with that, if you put it on an email to me, Ian at independentthinking.co.uk, and I'll forward it on to Haili and Liza, and they'll answer it if they're happy to do that. Some really good questions. There's one that I want to put to both of you for a short answer in sort of 30 seconds. It's a question that sort of vexed me through writing the book as well, really, as well as people in my own life. It's how some people survive, however you might describe that. And Chris Kilkenny, I can remember his name earlier, Chris Kilkenny from Scotland, you know, it's not a fairy tale. He's still a struggle. It's still hard work for him. And I think some of the things you're describing, Liza, it's still, well, both of you, it's still there. It's not a fairy tale. But how have you got this far? And what message would you give a teacher, and somebody's coming in from teacher training position, to help others from your background get as far as you've got? So just sort of 30 seconds, Liza, and I'll Haili have the last word. So Liza first.
Very good friendships, you know, gangs and the like, actually protected me. And then also to have some degree of faith in yourself. Faith ultimately is the biggie. Yeah. But also a bloody good mentor, and that's what I'm offering. You know, I really do get it now. I've had to trail the system. I've had to test areas. I know corporate bureaucracies, processes, and so on. And that mentoring is essential as well.
Like that. That's doable. So building up your making friendships work, building up your sense of self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, faith in yourself. You talked about the church as well. So faith is an important. Faith means there's something beyond just this. And then the mentor, just having somebody who can help you navigate the difficult world, that's all doable. Haili, so the same question then to you to finish off, please.
I think it's about instilling a sense of self-belief and self-worth in children, because once you have that, you can achieve anything. And I think, you know, Mark Goodwin made a good point on the questions on the chat, and said about making even the middle class curriculum relevant, and it is all about that. You know, I've had kids who want to become builders or have their own plumbing business, and, you know, they've said, what am I going to do with this? And I've said, well, you could use it for this, or you could use it for that. And it's absolutely making what they are learning relevant to them, and instilling this self-belief through this holistic approach, you know, as an educator, and having those relationships with the kids and making them believe in themselves, and using your own analogies, I think, and examples of what you've done as well, becoming a human, not just an educator.
Humans in the classroom. I love that. You're never sure doing these things whether, you know, are we going to fill an hour? How is it going to go? But then we filled an hour. We could probably fill another couple, I should think. It's fascinating. It's insightful. It's inspiring. Both of you, people like me from, what was I, sort of lower middle class, I suppose. I didn't have any of the issues that you had going to school and growing up, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So you inspire and motivate me to think, well, what can I do with my position to help, to support, to try and make a difference. And you do that for all the people who are here attending, and also when we put this out online as well. There's so much that you offer them, so thank you for that. Good luck with all your various plans and books and doctorates and degrees and children and all sorts of things, and look forward to where we can all sort of get together in the real world as well. So, and everybody who came along, thank you, and Nina in the text room, thank you very much.